They didn't even say the word fired, just a smile, a thin folder, and a sentence that hung in the air like static. Your role no longer aligns with our forward strategy. That's how Elise Carrington lost her job, after 17 years of spotless federal compliance oversight. 6 multi-million-dollar audits passed, and a digital system so airtight it once caught a rogue vendor before legal even blinked. She wasn't flashy, never needed to be. Elise was the kind of woman who showed up early, documented everything, and kept the company legal without needing applause. Which, apparently, made her obsolete. Or so they thought. Elise Carrington had just begun reviewing a vendor's compliance audit checklist when the voice crackled through the company-wide livestream. "Good morning, Neuroflux." The CFO beamed. "Let's welcome Darren Brooks, our new Chief Operating Officer." She didn't look up. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as a slightly delayed video feed flickered onto her second monitor. There he was, early 30s, all confident posture and polished teeth, with a haircut that probably came with a business podcast subscription. His blazer was tight, his tone tighter. "I'm here to bring efficiency," Darren said, pacing like a TED Talk reject, "to streamline what's working and eliminate what's outdated." That pause, that smirk. She kept her expression unreadable, but her hand tensed slightly over the trackpad. She clicked Save As on the internal licensing log, a multi-tabbed spreadsheet she had maintained and updated for 7 years, and renamed it Church Potluck Recipes, Archive. Then she zipped it, encrypted it, and copied it to a secure external drive in her purse. On screen, Darren moved like a man who'd read a blog post about power stances. "It's not about cutting," he said with a laugh. "It's about focusing, realignment, recognizing which roles serve today's momentum and which are legacy overhead." There it was. Legacy overhead. It wasn't a name, but it might as well have been. A few employees chuckled uncomfortably. Others shifted in their seats. Elise's name hadn't been mentioned, but no one had to say it. Everyone in that room knew which roles had been around long enough to wear the word legacy like a scar. Still, she didn't blink, just closed her laptop with the same calmness she used during federal inspections. Darren continued. "Some of these roles, especially those tied to historic systems and outdated procedures, will be reviewed for alignment with our forward motion." Then he added, "We'll be conducting evaluations starting next week." His eyes scanned the room through the camera, like a drone seeking soft targets. They landed, inevitably, on Elise. She gave him nothing, not a flinch, not a sigh, just the serene stillness of someone who's spent years building something that everyone forgot to understand. Later that night, alone in her apartment, with the white noise of a desk fan humming in the background, Elise watched the company Slack light up with emoji reactions to Darren's speech. She didn't reply. She just inserted the encrypted USB into her drawer, pushed it closed, and said out loud to no one in particular, "Well, that was predictable." Monday morning arrived like muscle memory. Elise Carrington stepped into the office at 7:15 a.m. Same as she had for the past 17 years. She liked the quiet before the chatter, the hum of idle monitors, the low whistle of HVACs kicking on. But that morning, something felt off. The energy had shifted, too many eager voices echoing from the break room. She didn't need to turn her head to know Darren Brooks was holding court again, sliding into her chair. Elise opened her laptop. A security prompt appeared. Strange. Her credentials usually sailed through. She entered her password again. Another prompt. Insufficient access rights. Please contact your system administrator. That was odd. She was the system administrator, at least for every compliance-related dashboard Neuroflux Labs used. She clicked into the License Tracker Pro system, the one she'd coded herself back in 2018. Same error. Then the audit log viewer. Blocked. Her pulse didn't spike, but something clenched in her stomach. She tried again. Still nothing. She glanced at the corner of her screen. The Neuroflux logo had changed, slightly sleeker. New color palette. The new dashboard interface wasn't hers. It wasn't even IT's. Someone had overwritten her entire framework. Elise stood up and walked down the hall to the IT cubicles. The lead technician, a kid named Shane, looked up with a gulp. "Shane, did the company roll out a new compliance suite?" she asked. He hesitated. We just installed a patch Darren's team requested. They said the old system was legacy and that access would be reassigned. I thought you were looped in." "I wasn't," Elise said, her tone flat. "Who now manages permissions?" Shane shifted. "I think it's routed through HR." Elise walked straight back to her office and called Human Resources. After 3 transfers, someone finally picked up. "Hi, this is Andrea with HR," came a young, practiced voice. "How can I help?" "My system access has been revoked. I wasn't notified. What's going on?" Andrea paused. "That's part of our new operational structure. Some access levels are under review during department realignment. Please direct any system-related concerns to your manager." "You're telling me I lost access to federal compliance dashboards without documentation or internal notice?" Elise asked. "I'm just relaying the update," Andrea said, her voice a fraction colder. Elise ended the call, set the receiver down slowly, and stared at her blank desktop screen. It didn't feel like oversight. It felt personal. She'd spent years building this infrastructure, linking expiration protocols, federal audit paths, embedded tracking fields, and now she was being cut out of it like she never existed. She opened a secure browser and logged into the National Licensing Portal using her personal biometric token. She navigated to the authority chain page, where every company license that touched federal regulation was listed. One by one, she verified FDA device compliance. Authorized, Elise Carrington, Health Tech Certification Bundle. Authorized, Elise Carrington, Biosecurity Handling Authority. Authorized, Elise Carrington. They hadn't transferred anything. All 31 active licenses were still under her name. She leaned back. Every shipment, every regulatory audit, every data link back, all of it still tied to her. That's when she opened her personnel contract. She hadn't looked at it in years. She scrolled past the boilerplate benefits and arbitration clauses until she hit Section 8B. She had written it herself 10 years ago when they first entered regulated biotech territory. Back then, it was a defensive clause. Now, it was a loaded weapon. Clause 8B. In the event of involuntary termination, any certifications, clearances, or licenses sponsored by the company and held by the employee shall be considered void, and the employee may initiate formal revocation with governing entities within federal compliance guidelines. It was airtight. Elise didn't need permission. She had the legal right to rescind the very authority Neuroflux depended on. And from the look of it, they had no idea. She saved a PDF copy, highlighted Clause 8B, and uploaded it to a private encrypted folder labeled Detachment Protocol, Initiate if Fired. Outside her office window, Darren was mid-speech again, gesturing wildly to a group of interns. They laughed at something she couldn't hear. Probably another joke about streamlining old systems. She stirred her coffee. The bitterness felt right. He thinks I'm just background noise, she thought. But the system still breathes in my name. And soon, it wouldn't breathe at all. The calendar invite called it a realignment huddle. That's how they phrased it. Like it was a pep talk in a locker room, not a corporate restructuring in disguise. Elise Carrington read the email twice. Then a third time. Mandatory attendance, 15-minute slots, one-on-one with Darren Brooks. No HR rep listed, no agenda attached, no bullet points. Just an upbeat line at the bottom. An opportunity to align your talents with our momentum. By mid-morning, the conference room had transformed into a tech startup therapy den. Beanbag chairs, laminated motivational posters, even bowls of trail mix. People trickled out of their sessions, whispering to each other in bright-eyed tones. Darren said, "I'm a future team lead." He loved my initiative on that Jira board. He sees me. The intern who once asked if OSHA was a type of coffee order skipped down the hallway humming. Elise watched from her desk, unamused. She checked the schedule posted outside the meeting room. Her name wasn't listed. She scrolled through her inbox. Nothing more than the generic invite. Odd. Everyone else had personal time slots. She tapped the shoulder of Quinn, a junior analyst. "Was I left off the schedule?" "Oh," Quinn said, looking awkward. "Darren said you could just drop in. You didn't need a time. Something about being a special case?" Special case. Right. Elise waited until just after 2:40 p.m. when the hallway buzz had dimmed and the room had cleared. She stepped inside. Darren sat alone at the head of the table, fingers drumming on a closed laptop, sleeves perfectly rolled to the elbow like a man ready to conduct surgery on morale. "Elise!" he said with the faux warmth of a LinkedIn influencer. "Come in." She didn't sit. There was no chair offered, just him, and the monitor behind him displaying a slide titled Q3 Organizational Flow, Draft. He leaned back, smiling. "Let's talk about alignment. You've been with us, what, a decade and a half?" 17 years, she replied, hands calmly folded in front of her. "Right. Incredible. Institutional knowledge like that, it's priceless. But we're evolving fast, leaner, more agile." Elise didn't flinch. "So I've heard." Darren clicked into a spreadsheet on the monitor. It was a breakdown of regulatory license holders. Each row listed a system, an expiry date, and a current point of contact. Elise saw her own name in row after row, but it had been struck through in red. Next to each, Madison Lee. She blinked once. "She doesn't hold any certifications yet." "She will," Darren said smoothly. "We're investing in people. Elise. Growth mindset. Potential over pedigree. She's not qualified to log into the federal credentialing portal." "She's learning," he replied. "Besides, we're decentralizing. The old bottleneck model, it's not scalable." "Licensing authority isn't a bottleneck," Elise said evenly. "It's a legal gate, a federal one." Darren waved a hand. Dismissive. "We're streamlining, simplifying. That's the direction." Elise stared at the screen. Her name, crossed out like an outdated label. No discussion, no context. Just quietly erased from the chain of trust she had maintained for nearly 2 decades. Darren smiled again. "I appreciate you coming in. We'll follow up." Elise gave a tight nod. She didn't ask questions, didn't raise her voice. She turned and walked out of the room. As she stepped into the hallway, she saw 3 team members clustered around printed job summaries. Everyone seemed to have a revised role description. Everyone but her. Jules stood near the end of the corridor, holding a clipboard and avoiding eye contact. She gave Elise a brief, guilty glance, like someone who'd watched a crime but didn't call the police. Back at her desk, Elise logged into her email, opened a blank draft, and typed only one line. "They're not just removing me. They're rewriting the system to pretend I was never part of it." She saved it, unsent, closed her laptop, and sat in silence. Not defeated, just aware. Isolated. Yes, but far from done. The email came in at 8:07 a.m. Subject line: Foundational Operations Support Assignment. No greeting, no context. Just a short directive. Effective immediately. You will assist with inventory reorganization in Archive Wing B. Please coordinate with Facilities Lead, Mark Tran. Elise Carrington stared at the screen, unmoving. For 17 years. She had written licensing policy, drafted federal audit responses, and maintained the company's regulatory lifeline. Now. They wanted her to sort mops. The storage wing was exactly as she remembered it. Dusty, fluorescent, forgotten. She stepped inside to find rows of unlabeled boxes, broken shelves, and a cracked whiteboard that read Q2 Deep Clean Initiative in faded marker. Mark, the facilities lead, offered her a clipboard and a kind nod, but no explanation. Just stack by product type, not by supplier. She said nothing, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work. The silence in that room was louder than any insult. By 10:30, Elise returned to her floor. As she passed the break room, she overheard two junior analysts laughing over a printed copy of an old compliance flowchart, the same one she had created years ago. "This thing has color codes like a kindergarten poster," one of them joked. "She manually timestamps each entry," the other added. "Does she not know automation exists?" They weren't whispering. They weren't even trying to hide it. Elise walked past them, expression unchanged. But inside, something shifted. A quiet, sharp detachment, like a door slowly closing from the inside. Back at her desk, she noticed Madison Lee lingering by the printer. Elise's printer. Madison looked up, gave her a polite, vague smile, then went back to collecting a freshly printed training packet titled Q3 Licensing Workflow Transition Plan, Draft V3. Underneath, in bold, provisional owner, Madison Lee. Elise didn't say a word. She just returned to her chair and opened her email. That's when she saw the sticky note. It had been slipped under her keyboard. Small. Yellow. Folded twice. Just a few words in a familiar hand. Jules. They're planning to remove your name from all systems this week. Darren's pushing it through Friday. HR's prepping paperwork. Watch your back. Her jaw tightened. She reread it. Once. Twice. Then tucked it silently into her coat pocket. She opened the internal regulatory dashboard, still locked, but she accessed the public registry interface from her private terminal. Her name was still listed as primary license holder on all 31 certifications. Still valid, still active, still the spine of the entire operation. But not for long. At 12:42 p.m., her phone pinged with a Slack notification. Q3 delegation plan. Comments requested. Inside, she found her name again, struck through in red, replaced by Madison. Pending credential update. That was it. The moment her silence ended, Elise stood, walked calmly to the small kitchenette, poured herself half a cup of stale coffee, and stared out the narrow office window. Below, the city kept moving. Taxis, vendors, people with purpose. She returned to her desk, opened her encrypted folder labeled Detachment Protocol, and highlighted one document. Contract, Orridge or E. Carrington. PDF scrolling to the bottom. She reread Clause 8B, the one she had drafted, reviewed, and fought to insert back when the company first entered the biotech space. The clause that allowed a terminated employee to rescind all company-sponsored certifications held in their name. She clicked print. The printer behind her hummed to life. Then she picked up her phone and searched her contacts. Found the notary office she had used twice before, once during an FDA expansion, once during a high-risk vendor audit. Notary Public, Monroe and 8th. How can I help you? I need to notarize a federal licensing revocation, Elise said. Her voice was calm, precise. We can do that. Tomorrow morning work for you? 10 o'clock. Booked. She ended the call, closed the file, and locked the printed document in her desk drawer. Then she grabbed a blank sticky note and wrote 5 words in neat, block letters. They think I won't move. She pressed it to the underside of her monitor. Out of view, but soon, the whole building would feel the quake. Elise sat alone in her glass-walled office, the skyline still wrapped in morning mist. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, then gently touched the printed form before her. Form 44, VLR, Voluntary License Relinquishment. The company's legal department had sent it 3 days ago, and for 3 days, she had studied every line like it was a battlefield map. At the bottom of the page, her signature had already been inked, notarized, valid, but not submitted. That was the difference. On the surface, it looked like a resignation, a quiet withdrawal. But Elise knew what Clause 8b meant. She had written it herself 6 years ago, buried in the subarchitecture of the license management system. If a signed relinquishment is recorded within 72 hours prior to termination, the system shall revert administrative access to the license author for 30 business days. It was designed for emergencies, to prevent tampering, but it was also the perfect trap. Her office phone buzzed. HR has scheduled a meeting for 11 o'clock a.m. in conference room C, the assistant said flatly. No pretext, no apologies, just the next move on their part. Elise closed the file on her screen, stood up, and placed the signed form into a thin leather folder. Her expression remained neutral, almost serene. Every move was now part of a script she had written in silence. As she walked down the corridor, she could feel the glances, curious, pitying. Some avoided her eyes, others offered weak, silent nods. She returned none of it. Her heels clicked softly against the polished floors, as if punctuating a countdown only she could hear. The conference room door was already ajar. Inside, 3 people waited: the HR director, a junior associate, and a man in a tailored suit she recognized from legal. The HR director cleared her throat. Due to structural realignments and ongoing efficiency initiatives, your role is being dissolved effective immediately. She smiled tightly, as if expecting a fight. Elise blinked slowly. I understand, she said simply. I'll need a printed termination letter with all legal markings, countersigned and dated. For my records. The man from legal nodded. Of course, we'll have that prepared within the hour. Elise opened her folder and slid the Form 44 VLR across the table. If it helps, she said, here's my voluntary relinquishment form, signed and notarized. The HR associate took it quickly, almost too eagerly. They believed she was conceding. They believed they'd won. But the submission process wasn't manual. The system had already registered her signature timestamp when she uploaded the document for notarization the previous evening. That action alone had triggered the 8B clause. By the time HR summoned her, the automated process had already begun shifting the operational backbone of the license system, quietly redirecting root authority to her backup account. eCar, admin layer. No one noticed. No one questioned the timing. She stood, nodded once, and walked out. She didn't look back. At the reception desk, she laid her badge on the countertop, pausing briefly. The badge reader blinked red, then green. That was the last handshake the system would allow from her original identity. As she boarded the elevator, a former colleague slipped in beside her. I'm sorry, Elise, he murmured, unable to meet her eyes. She gave a gentle nod, but said nothing. Let them believe what they wanted. She had no interest in correcting rumors. Outside, the city buzzed on. Elise pulled her coat tighter and crossed the plaza with a calm, detached elegance. No drama, no fanfare. Just a woman with a plan already in motion. Her phone buzzed once. A simple alert from the system. Admin override activated. She slipped the phone back into her coat pocket, her lips forming the faintest smile. Back in the server room, deep within the core architecture, a silent shift had taken place. The dashboard that once listed her as former license manager now labeled a new operator. Admin layer, E. Carrington. 30 business days of sole control. That's what they had gifted her. By trying to cut her out, they thought they'd removed her from power, but all they did was pull the trigger she'd left waiting, and it had already fired. At 7:13 p.m., the submission was logged. Elise Carrington didn't stare at the confirmation email when it arrived. She read it once, quietly, with the same expression she'd used to read a bus schedule. The subject line was sterile. License revocation request accepted. File 2200 The email detailed every credential tied to her name, 31 in total, marked for automatic nullification within 48 hours, unless reassigned by a certified federally registered replacement. Spoiler, there wasn't one. She closed her laptop, poured herself a glass of cranberry seltzer, and sat by the window of her apartment. Outside. The city blurred into itself, cars sliding through traffic lights, people clutching takeout, nothing unusual, but in 3 systems across 3 federal agencies. Something very unusual had already begun. The revocation timer had started ticking. Back at Neuroflux Labs, Darren Brooks was still in the office. He was leading a whiteboard session titled Reimagining Compliance, Scalable Trust in a Lean Environment. 5 junior staffers nodded along, most of them too young to have ever worked through a real audit. Madison Lee presented her first draft of the new licensing workflow. Darren beamed like a coach watching a rookie sink a free throw. "This is exactly the kind of initiative we need," he said. "The old system was too centralized. One person with all the keys? That's not sustainable." He gestured toward a flowchart that Madison had drawn in bright teal. Initiate, delegate, report, validate, certify. No one asked who had the legal authority to perform the last step. Meanwhile, Elise reopened her encrypted folder. Inside, she kept a private tracker, just a simple Excel sheet titled Countdown Dashboard, with 3 columns. License ID, status, revocation timer. She scrolled through the list. Every license now read, pending nullification. Countdown clocks beside each one were already ticking in real time. The shortest read, 47, 18, 39. The longest, 48. Wow. The system she'd built 6 years ago was now undoing itself, efficient, precise, and completely by the book. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Control didn't always look loud. At 8:50 p.m., a ping came through. Slack message from Jules. A screenshot. It was from Darren's private channel with the legal team. Should we prep license reassignment docs for FDA-facing clients, or will the portal auto-update once Elise is out? Response. Unsure. Can check with IT tomorrow. Darren. No rush. Let's finalize delegation structure first. No rush. Elise stared at those words. Then she reached for her tea, now lukewarm, and took a sip. Let him finalize. Let him tinker and tweak and rename. The structure he was building had no legal spine. By 10:20 p.m., she received the second confirmation, this time from the National Regulatory Credentialing Board. Federal certification IDs have been flagged for rescission. Visibility for reapplication restricted to authorized agents only. In simpler terms, anyone who tried to take over her certifications now had to start from scratch and go through a weeks-long registration, training, and approval process. The portals had no shortcuts, no overrides, no just update the contact info button. She shut her laptop for the final time that night. Outside, the hum of late traffic softened into quiet. The world didn't notice what had been set in motion, but inside the company's walls, though they didn't know it yet, something fundamental had already been removed. The lights were still on, but the generator had been unplugged. Darren, for his part, was in the middle of drafting a Q4 update for the executive team. His subject line read, Compliance Optimization, Phase 1, Near Completion. He typed the closing paragraph with pride. We are on track to fully restructure compliance management by month's end. Redundancies are being eliminated, and new ownership protocols are in development. He hit send, sat back, cracked his knuckles. He had no idea the licenses he was planning to reassign were now booby-trapped timers, counting down in silence. Each one tied to a system that refused to function without federally confirmed oversight. The clock wasn't just ticking. It had already started burning, And Elise? She wasn't watching for smoke. She had lit the match. It started with a single email. At 8:23 a.m., procurement flagged an urgent message from a major client, SteraMed, a longtime medical partner responsible for distributing Neuroflux's neural diagnostic devices. Urgent. Shipment, year 417, rejected. Certification ID, CN 2231, invalid. Delivery cannot be processed without valid compliance registration. Please advise immediately. Madison Lee stared at the screen, blinking. That's one of ours, right? She muttered. Pulling up the dashboard, Darren's team had redesigned. All indicators were green last week. She forwarded the message to Darren and added a note. Possible mismatch with updated license records? Darren, still in his usual morning Zoom with operations, didn't read it right away, but by 9:10, 3 more alerts came in, 2 from vendors, 1 from an internal production manager, compliance signature mismatch. System cannot validate certifying officer. Error code 470, license orphaned. Finally, Darren appeared in the compliance Slack thread. Just update the license holder to Madison Lee. That should solve it. It tried. The edit failed. Error. Authorization restricted. Certifying officer not eligible. They tried again. This time with a forced override script. Rejected. System status revoked. No valid replacement found. In the conference room, tension began to spread. Darren paced, arms folded. It has to be a glitch, he insisted. Just get someone to escalate it with the credentialing board. One of the junior analysts, Sam, cleared his throat. I checked the federal registry. The cert is no longer assigned to us. It says revoked by officer of record. Darren blinked. What officer? A silence passed. Madison's voice was small. Elise. By 10:45. They were in emergency mode, operations, compliance, and legal sat crowded around the long meeting table as dashboards flickered in real time. 8 licenses had flipped from pending to suspended. 4 more were now tagged invalid. Vendor syncs were failing. Delivery systems paused mid-queue. Project timelines stalled without anyone authorized to push them forward. Madison pulled up a folder on her laptop titled Q3 License Delegation Plan and said, with visible hesitation, "We were supposed to finalize this today, but now, none of it's legal." Darren rubbed his eyes. Then someone else submits for replacement. Start the process for reauthorization. That's when Jules, who had been quiet up until now, slid a printed report across the table. Her face was pale, her voice even. I did a full trace on every license Elise held, she said. There are 31 of them, across 3 categories: medical device regulation, compliance oversight, and export tracking. Darren flipped through the packet. And? Jules pointed at the highlighted lines. No one in this company is currently eligible to register for reissuance, she said. Not a single employee has cleared all 3 federal certification tiers. Madison is still in stage 1. But we can fast track, right? Darren asked. Tone strained. Jules didn't smile. Federal licenses aren't pizza orders. There's no express lane. It takes 4 to 6 weeks, minimum, and that's assuming Madison passes all 3 exams and completes federal compliance interviews. Silence settled across the room like dust in a blackout. Then who? Darren asked slowly. Can sign off on these certifications right now? Jules didn't flinch. Only Elise Carrington, and she just voluntarily revoked every license in her name. Madison looked down. Sam exhaled audibly. Darren stood still, jaw clenched, staring at the flickering dashboards as if willing them to reset. They didn't. And outside the conference room, the emails kept coming. At 9:12 a.m., the front desk called up to compliance. There are 3 inspectors here from the FDA. Scheduled audit. They're asking for your license access portal. Madison Lee froze mid-sentence. She was halfway through a draft response to a vendor inquiry when the words registered. Wait, what audit? Sam, the junior compliance analyst, blinked. It's the Q3 routine inspection. They do one every year around this time. Someone should have known. Elise would have known. Madison swallowed hard. Tell them we'll be right down. The first real cracks didn't come with alarms. They came with a gentle knock. By 9:20, the 3 FDA reps were seated quietly in Conference Room B. They wore matching navy blazers and neutral expressions. One of them opened a sleek laptop and asked calmly, "Please log us into the credential dashboard. We'd like to review your active certifications and renewal logs before facility walkthrough." Madison nodded to IT. Darren was still in his office. On another call, Jonas, the IT tech, entered the login credentials they had set up the previous week under Madison's new user profile. Access denied. Error code 70. No authorized certifying officer found. He tried again. Same result, Sam whispered. Try Darren's admin override. Jonas hesitated, then typed it in. Access restricted. License authority not validated. Please log in using a registered officer of record. By the time Darren entered the room at 9:45, things were unraveling. What's the problem? He asked, eyeing the silent FDA officials. Madison kept her voice low. The portal's rejecting all internal logins. It's asking for an approved officer of record. They revoked Elise's access. Just override it with a temporary session ID. Jonas shook his head. There's no temp option. It's locked at the federal level. You need verified clearance. Darren muttered. Fine. Use her old credentials. Jonas froze. That's against protocol. Just do it, Darren snapped. We need the data open now. At 9:51, Jonas entered Elise Carrington's deactivated login into the portal. The screen blinked. For a second, it looked like it might work. Then the background went black. A red message flashed. Unauthorized access detected. User revoked. Status blacklisted. This incident has been reported to the NRCS and internal audit systems. Jonas's face went white. We've triggered a fraud alert. Darren stood still. What does that mean? It means, Jules said, entering the room at that exact moment, that we just locked ourselves out permanently. So, by 10:05 a.m., every compliance portal at Neuroflux Labs had entered a lockdown protocol. The FDA auditors sat quietly, no longer asking questions. One of them typed a note into their tablet and closed it. We won't be able to proceed without access to active certifications. This will be marked as a failed inspection. Darren tried to argue. It's a temporary tech issue. We'll have it resolved. We understand, one of them said flatly. You'll receive the report within 48 hours. Please coordinate any appeals with our enforcement division. They stood, shook no hands, walked out. Back upstairs. Darren's inbox pinged. Subject: Compliance Breach Notification from Internal Audit. Attempted access to revoked credentials has been flagged. You are required to submit a written incident explanation by 2:00 p.m. today. Legal review is pending. He closed the email without replying. The room around him felt thinner now, like the oxygen had been turned down. Madison sat motionless, staring at the screen. Jules quietly handed her a printed sheet, a checklist Elise used to run before every audit. On the bottom, in small blue ink, was Elise's handwriting. Never improvise with federal systems. They remember everything. Darren didn't say a word. He walked into his office, closed the door, and turned off the lights. No alarms rang, no dramatic shouting, but the building knew the system had snapped shut. Callum Vance returned to the office like a man stepping into applause. Tan from 3 weeks in Capri and dressed in a crisp, ocean blue linen shirt. He strolled through the front atrium of Neuroflux Labs at 8:37 a.m. with the casual confidence of someone who believed the empire had run smoothly without him. He finger-gunned the front desk, winked at a receptionist, and made a comment about finally upgrading the espresso machine. No one laughed. A junior assistant offered a tight smile and handed him a sealed folder. "Legal said to give you this first." Callum raised an eyebrow. "Is this about the audit?" He didn't wait for an answer. Upstairs. The silence was immediate. The kind of quiet that doesn't belong in offices. No clicking keyboards, no hallway chatter, no buzz of meetings in motion. Just stillness. Callum stepped into the executive suite and glanced around. Darren's office door was open, but empty. Madison stood at the copier, unmoving, a report hanging limply in her hand. Legal's door was closed. Compliance was dark. He walked into the conference room and dropped the folder onto the table. "Get me every department head, now." By 9:02, the table was full. Operations, compliance, legal, IT, logistics, all looking like they hadn't slept since Friday. Jules sat at the far end, quiet. Darren took the seat next to her, bags under his eyes, jaw set too tight. Callum didn't sit. He connected his tablet to the screen behind him and opened the internal license dashboard. It took 3 seconds to load, then turned blood red. System status, regulatory failure. Active licenses, 0. Certifying officer of record, Elise Carrington. Status, revoked, no replacement registered. Callum scanned the room. "Is this a test system?" No one answered. He looked at Darren. "What the hell am I looking at?" Darren cleared his throat. There was a restructuring. Elise was reassigned and later exited. We intended to delegate her licenses, but the portal rejected our entries. There's been some complication. Callum's voice dropped. "You removed the only person tied to our federal compliance authority, with no backup?" "We assumed the role could be reassigned." "You assumed?" Legal chimed in, voice low. "We received confirmation over the weekend that all 31 licenses were revoked. The federal database now requires full recertification from a qualified individual." Callum turned back to the screen. Every module he clicked, device compliance, export validation, manufacturing inspection, flashed the same red alert. Access blocked, officer revoked, no valid replacement. He closed his eyes briefly. "The audit," Jules finally spoke. "Failed. The FDA marked it as incomplete due to credential denial." Callum looked at her. "Why didn't anyone stop this?" Jules hesitated. "She tried. Elise flagged the risk 2 months ago. It was dismissed." Callum said nothing, just reached for the printed HR file on the table. He flipped until he found her exit paperwork, scanned it, then stopped at the highlighted section. Clause 8B. In the event of involuntary termination, all company-sponsored licenses held by the employee shall be nullified within 48 hours unless properly reassigned under federal protocols. Callum stared at the words as if they were written in a language he once knew but forgot. His empire wasn't burning. It had been hollowed out. And now, everyone could see the hole. On the screen behind him, Elise's name remained in bold. Carrington. Elise. Status. Revoked. No replacement found. The dashboard pulsed red in silence. Elise let the phone ring just long enough to make him sweat. She recognized the number. It was Graham Niles, Director of Operations. Once an arrogant gatekeeper who dismissed her protocols as overly cautious, now reduced to cold calling the one person they all thought they'd outgrow. She answered with the calm clarity of someone who'd already buried the past. "This is Elise." On the other end, Graham hesitated. She could almost hear him swallowing his pride, like broken glass in his throat. "Elise, it's Graham. Listen, we've run into a situation." The silence on her end said everything. He stumbled forward, filling it. "Look, We know things ended badly, but we're asking for your help. We need you. She didn't flinch, just sipped her coffee. Outside. The breeze caught the corner of her curtain, lifting it like a white flag. Graham continued. We got it wrong. You were right. Everyone knows that now. We need someone who can reauthorize the licenses. We're stalled. Elise, we're bleeding. She let the weight of his words hang. Once. His voice had been loud in every boardroom, dismissing her expertise with smiles that never reached his eyes. Now. It trembled like an old stare. She considered responding with anger, with triumph, with some closing line that would make him hurt the way they made her feel for months. But instead, her voice came soft, even. That's a nice offer. And then she hung up. No threats, no insult, just a full stop. Back in the boardroom, Graham stared at his phone as if it had betrayed him. Callum, the CEO, looked up from his laptop. Did she agree? Graham didn't answer right away. He shook his head. She's not coming. The room froze. Legal glanced at compliance. Compliance looked toward IT. Darren buried his face in his hands. No one had a plan B. No one had expected the silent trap she laid to snap so precisely shut. Back in her apartment. Elise set her phone down beside her espresso. The quiet was complete. Not triumphant, just still. Her laptop pinged. A message from Helix Core, the new firm that welcomed her just last week. Subject: Neuroflux still flagged, FDA audit halted. She smiled. Not wide, not smug, just enough to mean something. She typed one line back to her new CEO. And this is only the beginning. Outside. Traffic rolled on. Life moved. And Elise Carrington? She didn't need revenge. She was already on the next chapter. Elise tapped the final key, then sat back in her chair, exhaling softly. On her screen. The update appeared in crisp. Black font. Director of Compliance. Helix Core Technologies. She didn't add a caption. No announcement. No curated farewell post. Just a simple update to her LinkedIn profile. One sentence. One line of black ink. That was all it took. The moment it went live. Her notifications began to blink. Not with likes or comments, but with private messages. Quiet ones. Curious ones. And a few, respectful. Within an hour, 2 major clients of Neuroflux posted public statements on their corporate pages. The first came from Ardentia Health Systems, the second from Flagstone Capital. Both cited the same reason for their departure: commitment to certification continuity and long-term ethical compliance. Neither mentioned Neuroflux by name, but both tagged Helix Core. Elise didn't smile. She simply closed the laptop and turned toward the window. The city stretched beneath her, sun glinting off rooftops, glass catching the last gold of afternoon. In her hand, a half-sipped cup of tea. On her lap, a novel she hadn't finished in months. For the first time in weeks, she read more than 2 pages. Then came a vibration. Her phone, face down on the table, buzzed once. A message from Jules. You'll want to see this. Attached was a screenshot from a private Slack channel inside Neuroflux, one Elise had once managed. It was Darren Greaves, the company's COO. His message was plain, typed at exactly 3:16 p.m. Is there any way to restore Elise's license privileges temporarily? 8 people had seen it. No one replied. Jules hadn't written anything else. She didn't need to. The silence in that screenshot said everything. Elise read the message twice. Then once more. Her tea had gone cold. She set the cup down gently. The look in her eyes wasn't vengeful. It wasn't smug. It was something deeper, like watching a tide retreat after knowing the storm had already passed. She typed a reply to Jules. Inevitable, thank you. Then she turned off her phone. Outside. The light was beginning to shift. Soft, pink-hued, gentle. She stood, stretched, and walked across the room to her small kitchen. The kettle clicked on. She didn't check emails, didn't refresh any feeds, didn't measure her worth by pings or pings back. She had built her own boundary now. She had crossed into something firmer, quieter, hers. The irony wasn't lost on her. A company that once flaunted innovation and independence now sat paralyzed by its own decisions. The same executives who had dismissed her warnings were now caught in the very net they'd helped weave. That single Slack message from Darren was more than desperation. It was confession. She thought of the interns she used to mentor. The late nights spent building a compliance protocol no one thought was glamorous. And now those unseen layers were the only thing holding what was left of the system together. Except she wasn't holding it anymore. Elise walked back to her chair. Slowly, not with hesitation, but presence. She opened the window slightly. The summer air carried hints of jasmine and street sounds below. She let it in, somewhere behind her. Her laptop blinked with another notification. She didn't look. Not tonight. Tonight. She was untethered, from expectation, from blame, from even victory. It wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about finally, fully, stepping out of the shadow they cast over her name. Her story was no longer being written by them. It was being signed. In her own ink. Elise didn't need a grand finale. No applause. No vindication parade. Just a Tuesday morning with strong coffee, a clear sky over Chicago, and peace humming through the glass walls of her new corner office at Helix Core. Her desk was clean, minimalist. No stacks of old paper. No stress relics from a company that once saw her as legacy infrastructure. Just a dual monitor setup, a sleek keyboard, and one sticky note pinned to the edge of the screen. Yellow, handwritten. In case they ever forget, I was the license. The dashboard on her monitor was glowing green, every section, every compliance vertical. She watched the system hum like a well-fed machine. Medical-grade logistics, pharmaceutical intake reporting, vendor traceability, all operational, all certified, all tied to one name, Elise Carrington, Chief Compliance Officer. The difference now? She wasn't fighting to be heard. She was the reason things worked. A soft ping echoed on her secondary screen, an industry update alert. She clicked it lazily, already knowing what it would say. A bold red headline. Neuroflux Technologies added to FDA enforcement watch list. She read the first few lines without emotion. Failure to renew critical certification classes. Unregistered oversight. Active vendor flags unresolved. Below that, a smaller note. Former compliance officer Elise Carrington assumed executive role at Helix Core 3 weeks prior. She didn't smirk. She didn't gloat. She just took another sip of Colombian roast, no cream, no sugar, and leaned back into her chair. There was a knock at her door. "Boardroom's ready, Elise," said Camilla, a junior analyst she'd mentored since day 2 at Helix. Kind, smart, no ego. "Thanks," Elise nodded, rising with slow, purposeful calm. She grabbed her laptop, tucked a hard copy of the original compliance blueprint under her arm, the one she'd refined for over a decade at Neuroflux, and followed Camilla down the hall toward a meeting with Helix Core's largest biotech client to date. She remembered when Neuroflux used to court that client, used their name in every earnings call like a trophy. And now, they'd walked away. Chose trust over flash, substance over slogans. Just before stepping into the boardroom, Elise paused. She thought of Darren's smirk, of the interns who called her color-coded charts cute, of the HR folder handed to her without a conversation, of the morning she was locked out of the system she'd built, of the silence that followed when no one stood up, and then she let it go. She walked in, professional, unapologetic. She took her seat at the head of the table, opened her laptop, and began the presentation not with a pitch, but with the simple phrase, Here's what compliance should feel like: stable, clear, and permanent. Across town, Neuroflux was still choking on paperwork, fielding regulatory calls, scrambling to rebuild systems they didn't understand. Darren had been demoted, now a project liaison, stripped of clearance, stripped of narrative. The company had lost not just its footing, but its credibility. And Elise? She wasn't coming back. She wasn't even looking back. She didn't need revenge. She had architecture. She had clarity. She had her name on every single framework Helix Core now depended on. And that sticky note? It stayed pinned. Not for vanity, not for bitterness, just in case they ever forgot.